Our underreported story segment tonight. Now, there's a lot going on in the news this week. Trump recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. A third Mueller official exposed as blatantly anti-Trump. A terror plot uncovered to assassinate British Prime Minister Theresa May. Ironically, just a week after she chided Trump for talking about the dangers of Islamic terrorism. The case of the gay wedding cake in front of the Supreme Court. Times Person of the Year, the hashtag #MeToo campaign. Democratic Congressman John Conyers resigning from Congress after a bunch of sexual harassment allegations. All important, all interesting stories. But there's one story this week that the media ignored. A woman in Georgia, a private citizen, saved the life of a police officer when the officer was attacked. And she saved his life by using her firearm to stop the attacker. With me now from the Daily Caller, Amber Athey. Amber, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on the show.
All right, Amber, I want to walk through this story step by step, what happened in practicality before we get to the political implications. So this happened in the state of Georgia. A police officer by the name of Sergeant Harkness, if I understand the story correctly, was giving a ride in his police car to a homeless man. Not a ride for fun, but he was actually taking the homeless man to get him something to eat and to give him money. And instead of thanking him, the homeless man attacked him.
That's exactly right. And then what happened immediately after, however, was a woman who witnessed the attack in the gas station parking lot got out of her car and fired a gun at the homeless man. Apparently 3 times. She hit him at least once. He fled across the street to a McDonald's where he then punched an elderly woman in the face. But then a bunch of McDonald's customers ended up grabbing the guy, throwing him to the ground, and holding him until more police could arrive. And the sheriff there credited the woman with saving the police officer's life.
Right, and I think the critical part of this story, and we would never hear this story one way or the other, but the critical part on the mainstream media, but the critical part of this story is that the homeless man, when he attacked the police officer, according to the sheriff's department, the homeless man reached for the officer's firearm. He reached for the weapon, so he wasn't just having some sort of episode. He wasn't just, I guess it wasn't low-level violence that we're talking about. He clearly had the intent to harm not only the police officer, but possibly a lot of other people around him.
Right, and probably to kill. So this is a great example of when basically what we call a good guy with a gun stops someone who is intent on doing harm to people, someone who's a legal firearm owner. And the media would have you believe that this is a rare story, that this is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of case. But we've seen so many stories like this just in the past couple of months. Take, for example, the Texas church shooting, where a former NRA instructor shot at a gunman who killed dozens of people in a church, chased him down in his car, and ended up holding him for police to arrive. And then a similar situation, which really hasn't gotten any coverage in the mainstream media, was a Nashville church shooting where only one person died because a brave usher tackled the gunman and then got his own gun from his car and held him at gunpoint until police arrived. So these stories are much more common than the media would have you realize. And they demonstrate that there are situations where police aren't able to get to scenes as quickly as private citizens are. And that's why our right to the Second Amendment is so very important.
Right, and I think it's worth noting here, with all due respect to police officers, you bring up an excellent point. This is not the fault of police officers. They simply can't bilocate. They can't be everywhere at all times, and sometimes emergencies, require that instantaneous reaction, that instantaneous availability. And I believe the average response time for police officers across our nation, this is not even in rural areas where it can be longer than that, is between 7 and 10 minutes. That simply wouldn't have cut it in the case of this situation that we're talking about, this police officer who was being attacked. It wouldn't have mattered even if he could make that telephone call, which he couldn't because he was being attacked. He didn't have 7, 8, 9, or 10 minutes. He didn't have any time at all. And I think I know the answer to this, and I think this type of story, the fact that the mainstream media hides it, exposes their bias. But why wouldn't this be a story that gets as many headlines as a tragedy? When we saw the shooting in Texas, we talked about it for weeks on end, as we should, to honor these victims. We talked about gun control because liberals said it was an example of gun control. Why don't we talk about these stories to balance it out?
Well, it's fairly obvious. There's a liberal bias in the media. They're anti-gun. And every time that a shooting happens where people are killed, they always blame it on the gun rather than the perpetrator. And they choose not to focus on the brave people who save lives when they have legal firearms to fight back. And when we saw what happened after the Texas church shooting and after the Las Vegas shooting was a whole bunch of misinformation on behalf of the media. Places like CNN and MSNBC claim that firearm suppressors actually make guns silent and would cause more deaths. And then they claim that bump stocks turn semi-automatic rifles into machine guns. And then there was, of course, the infamous USA Today video that claimed that you can attach a chainsaw to an AR-15. So they spread this misinformation with the goal of making guns seem really scary to the average person who really doesn't know that much about them. But Republicans and conservatives are really wise to this tactic, and they say a really smart thing, in my opinion, which is we're not going to debate gun control with you until you learn the basic facts of firearms, because otherwise debate is pretty much useless.
It is, and firearms are scary to people who are trying to commit crimes and people who are trying to murder people and people who are trying to assault police officers. Those are the types of people, the types of criminals that privately owned and privately carried firearms, that they should be frightened of these firearms, because what those firearms do 80 times more often than they hurt someone is they save someone's life. And that statistic, it's absolutely incredible to me that people on the left, gun control advocates, just ignore that statistic as if it doesn't exist when they're making their case. And it shows us, it shows you and me and our viewers exactly what their agenda really is, that even though they appeal to our emotions, they say, do you want people to continue dying? That's not really what they're about. They're not really about the safety and security of firearms or the safety and security of the American people. They're about their own gun control, gun confiscation agenda, and that should scare us too. Amber, thanks for writing about this story. I appreciate it, and thanks for being on the show today. All right, guys, you have 1 minute to tweet me at Liz_Wheeler before we're back with Kevin O'Brien to talk about what Trump did with the national parks in Utah. Liberals were horrified that the president scaled back the parks. They're accusing Trump of disrespecting Native Americans. Trump says that's not what he did at all, and liberals are purposely trying to smear him. We will show you the truth that liberals won't tell you next. See you in a moment.